Shout out to Jamie for making this all happen.
Shout out to Jamie for everything.
Yeah.
He's the man.
Did you know him before
Oh yeah.
you started Phin? Okay.
I've known Jamie since kindergarten.
What?
Yeah, so his older brother Corey was one of my best friends. We're still friends, but he got married and lives farther away than Jamie right now. So I was friends with Corey because Jamie was a year younger than us, but we were friends with both of them. And then I don't know, we just ended up hanging out after college and whatnot. And then he moved away, but then I was like, I'm your same age, but you're in a different grade, Jamie. That's what matters.
Yeah, he's awesome.
You were. Yeah, he is awesome.
It's good seeing folks on here, by the way. See a lot of names I know.
Let's see who I know. Patrick Smallwood.
Got two Carrie in here.
We'll get started around 4 minutes past for you folks who just joined. Just give some folks opportunity. Dictator Wes.
Dictator Wes.
What's up, Carrie?
If your cryptocurrency is still valid, somewhere buried deep in my email, I have 1 billion dictator coin that you sent me.
Just waiting for you to give it away. That's right.
Carrie, if you find a way to email me after here, I can give you will be the single largest holder of dictator coin if I have anything to do with it. Roughly valued at 4 cents.
Oh, American. It's probably a lot less than that. But maybe this is like, it's a boom waiting to happen. My website too, I talk about how it's a scam and it's a joke. And I actually had a guy message me through the website. He's like, hey man, when are you gonna really get this thing going? I invested a lot of money in it. I'm like, what? I told you, this is a joke. Don't do that.
Do you still get offers to like moon pump cryptocurrencies because of your YouTube?
All the time. I should show you my crypto Gmail channel. Yeah. And it's always the worst. Some of them are like rated R names too that I won't even say here, but some of them are like Elon Moon Rocket version 2 Doge. And it's going to the moon, baby.
I guess if you hit enough buzzwords, you'll generate. Just go into any of the Reddit sub channels and just get people to buy it. For those of you who just joined, we're just going to wait a few more minutes, give everyone the opportunity to get in here, and then we'll get started. Chat's open, Q&A is open. If you got any questions right now, that's where people get the most value. So feel free to start chatting.
Start chatting.
That Empath shirt's looking pretty good, Kyle.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
This exclusive one of two?
Yes.
Exclusive one of two.
Just a little jealous.
Our t-shirt budget allowed for 2 t-shirts.
You couldn't go 33% over budget and get one more.
Yeah,
right?
we spent the rest of our budget on ramen noodles to live. So you know what that's like, Connor.
Hey, beans and ramen noodles. I still enjoy eating them to this day.
Who doesn't? I know people complain, like, oh, I'm on the ramen noodle diet because I've got a startup. It's like, they're actually good.
Yeah, hot dogs and white
ways
bread.
You can do. You can do so much with noodles. I mean, just get the right spices,
Yep.
Salt and pepper.
Carrie, I don't want to.
And if you have a little extra coin.
If you have an extra, spices get expensive. I didn't know that until I started buying them. So
yeah,
and I'm not even buying. What's that fancy spice from the Middle East? Saffron. I don't even do that. But
no, who does? Well, Kyle probably does, but
we'll get rolling in 1 or 2 more minutes, folks. Let's not.
I can only afford black t-shirts typically, so this is like a holiday for me.
So Carrie, I don't want to degrade hot dogs, but it was just beans and ramen noodles were like half the price of hot dogs. And I remember it's like me and Josh, my co-founder, is not on this webinar. All we ate was ramen noodles and beans, not because we had to. They got to a point where we buying the wrong hot dogs. I wish I had that Costco t-shirt. That's I got that dog in me, and it's the sign of their hot dog.
Hold on. One Reg Harness just got on.
Oh no,
Reg Harness. He's gonna sit here and shout at us from the rafters. It's definitely get the F off my lawn. Or how many times do we have to tell you, old man? I don't know.
For those of you that don't know, Reg is a good friend of all of ours. Just saying.
Reg is watching from the kitchen. Reg is a wonderful friend of ours. Wonderful friend. You all ready to get started? We can get
let's do it.
Do it.
So everyone, thanks for joining. You are case you missed the website, you are on the 4th installment of the DCD webinar series, Deep Cyber Dive. Today we have 2 esteemed guests, Wes Spencer and Kyle Christensen, both friends of mine, both experts in their own right, even though they probably wouldn't admit to being so, in MSP and cybersecurity. And this topic that we have today, which is cybersecurity different from managed IT, that's probably why Reg is actually on this call, is we have had this conversation privately with many, many different people, including several other guests of the DCD webinar series on some other webinars we did. So I won't steal too much of Wes and Kyle's thunder, but I imagine not only are you all going to have a lot of questions for us, and that's where everyone gets the most amount of value. So I would highly recommend, if you have questions, ask them in the Q&A, ask them in the chat. We will get to them. We do have some regularly scheduled programming to make sure we're a little bit structured, but this is about all of you watching and listening. So if you have something that's relevant to your business, or you have a burning question that you would really hope Wes, Kyle, or I can answer, or we can answer together, it is perfect and welcomed and encouraged for you to put that in the chat. So without further ado, let's introduce our first guest, Wes Spencer. Wes, how you doing today?
Connor, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, my friend.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. For those, I feel like everyone on this call would know you, but what's your background?
No, I'm surely not. So I am a cybersecurity guy. I've been one of those weirdos that went to it for college and never, left it. I was a punk in high school in the 90s, and back when the world was open, right? So I did, it was never like some Kyle Hansloven level elite person, but I was always a punk script kiddie doing all those things. So I just love security. Love helping people. So I spent a few years in education, was a CIO at a bank. And then we left and went and started a company called Perch back in 2016 and built that over 4 years, sold that to ConnectWise. And I stuck around at ConnectWise for about a year as their VP and external CISO. And now I do all kinds of things around security and security education, and one of the co-founders of Empath, helping MSPs grow in their security journey. And man, I just love MSPs, love education, love helping others out. And that's kind of what I've dedicated my mission and career to, Connor.
You definitely have a lot of expertise in security and MSP land. Usually every time you open your mouth, I'd like to listen.
Oh, thanks.
Unless you're degrading Skyline Chili, and then I'm forced to take the other side of that argument. So
we'll have time for that argument later.
We'll have time for that. And then, of course, we have the esteemed Kyle Christensen. Kyle, how are you doing today?
Apparently esteemed. Steaming.
Pre-steamed, not steamed yet. We're going to actually, we got you on here so Wes and I could roast you.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
It would be fun. Tell the folks listening or watching a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, kind of like Wes, also a punk kid, but went down the other fork in the road. Rather down the cyber path, I was always the kid pulling the computer apart and saying, hey, what's in this? What makes it tick? Some 18 years later, have really been involved in most aspects of the MSP channel, from giant retail all the way down to a garage-based MSP. Started a little consulting firm around 2018, 2019. Also got into some business strategy certifications, some of those business operating systems, as they like to call them, call themselves, and really have just been obsessed with figuring out how MSPs can do things better, but also not do it at a cost of the owner's wallet, which always seemed to be the case, because as technologists, right, it's always, hey, let's dive deep into the tech, and then all of a sudden, as we saw this year, not making any money. So how can we do both and have fun?
That is a lot. And I guess you failed to mention, although your t-shirt mentioned it for you, you have recently announced that you are a co-founder of Empath with Wes and Alex.
Yes, one of the fun vagabond exercises that Alex and I did this year, of just educating MSPs, turned into a quick passion and love. And we kind of started talking with Wes quite a bit of, can we turn MSP education into an actual thing, for to prevent regulation, to really exercise a team that can march in the same direction, but also be accountable, right? It's, where do we find the time and the cycles to having an MSP that does what the MSP needs to do?
It's hard. I remember
about a lot today.
I'm sure we will. The phrase, I remember having conversations with both of you about, how do we teach MSPs, how to MSP. And I know much less about that than you two, but I was always happy to listen. So good to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So our topic today, how is cybersecurity different from managed IT? To set the stage for all of you, for everyone here, there have been a few transitions that the MSP industry has largely gone through in the last 20 years. The first was from break fix to managed IT, or managed services, like consistent recurring revenue. And now a second transition is upon us. It's happening right now. Some may argue that it happened already and we're behind the boat, but we'll leave that for discussion later. It is transitioning from just managed services like IT and infrastructure to also adding cybersecurity, which cybersecurity sales are a lot different. As Wes and I have a conversation at IT Nation about it, is selling IT and selling cybersecurity are vastly different things and also sometimes require vastly different skill sets. So I will lob this question over to Wes here. How is cybersecurity different from managed IT?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can go with this, right? One can argue that it's an offshoot. One can argue that it is also separate in its function and form. So let me just take maybe a bit of a step back, Connor, and kind of like look at this from the enterprise level, because the enterprise is really where this is all born out of, right? I mean, you could make the argument as well that IT was born in post-World War II, right? There's several fascinating books about the Enigma machine, the race to break the Enigma that led into actually creating like frames. They call these bombs, BOMBESs. They called them frames of bombs, had a mainframe of bombs, right? And this company called International Business Machines were the ones that created these actual machines. I mean, we're getting way back, right? But my point is, as soon as the war was over, we had these vastly superior to any other thing we've ever had, digital calculating machines, basically. We went from analog to digital. And they thought, what do we do with this, right? And naturally, I think the idea is, well, let's take this into business application, right? And so there, IT was really born in its true sense of the word. And so cybersecurity creeps in because really IT had never really needed to consider security, right? Like if you look at the DARPANET days and even the impetus of where the internet was created, that all came specifically because we were worried about nuclear warfare. And so this idea of, well, let's connect government, military institutions, and some education together, and DARPANET was born in the 70s. Well, that all led to, again, no concept of cybersecurity at all. Why do you need to secure something that's a closed loop that no one has access to? And so we've been paying for the sins of these errors ever since, right? Once the internet went commercialized, thank you, Al Gore. Once we saw all this application and all business move into digital means and the internet drove all of this, it created a huge issue. And so you could talk about all day long how they are two separate things. But the other thing I'll say too, is a lot in the enterprise world, we often talk about how cybersecurity needs to be separate. They need to be two adjoining domains that are separate from one another because we have conflicts of interest within IT. In other words, we used to have this idea of, well, cybersecurity is underneath the umbrella of IT, and that does make functional logical sense. And I would agree with that concept. But what happens when you have CIOs traditionally who oversee cybersecurity, but mainly are more responsible and more caring about keeping IT systems up and online? Well, that sometimes you shave things off from a cybersecurity perspective because uptime, resiliency, service delivery are the most important pieces, right? And so that led us into this whole world of like, well, maybe this whole cybersecurity thing does need to be separate and distinct, right? And that's where this whole idea came from. So now to zoom into MSPs for a minute, what you see around MSPs specifically is they're learning to juggle the same thing too, because the way you delivered cybersecurity back pre-2018 was firewall and AV, and that was it. And that's all you needed to deliver because that's all clients really cared about. Post 2018 and the ransomware epidemic that happened over those last 5 years, all of a sudden the games have changed, right? Compliance has come down market. Threats have come down market. The need to do more, fourth party, third party requirements, and cyber insurance has all pushed us to do more. So now you do have a big distinction between the two, and MSPs are left thinking through, what do I do about that? Do I actually deliver that cybersecurity? Do I find a partner that helps with it? Or some things that I can do on my own and other things that I shouldn't? Kyle and I have worked already on building sort of a revenue model for MSPs, helping them understand basically where you're at in your revenue, and your maturity should dictate what all you can do from a deliverability perspective. So anyway, that's kind of a history of the two. They are distinct, they are different, but they do overlap. quite a bit as well, just in terms of how you have to think and approach them as well. How's that for a long-winded, confusing answer?
I don't know if it's confusing, long-winded, maybe.
Yes.
You talk very fast, but that brings us to a question that we've discussed before, and I've talked with people like Reg and others, is what qualifies an MSP to handle cybersecurity? So should MSPs do both IT and cybersecurity? In which scenarios and why? And this isn't a question for just Wes, by the way, Kyle.
Yeah, I want to flip that to
Yeah,
Kyle.
it's funny because Wes, as he started to talk, approached it from the exact same place I was going to, which Connor, you said we're in the second phase, and I would argue we're in like the fourth or fifth phase. So I actually did a video on YouTube recently where, from a small business perspective, not an enterprise perspective, I broke down the evolution of an MSP actually from the space race, because NASA really was a small entity in the beginning. Same idea with the mainframe, bringing in IT, how entrepreneurship brought in, hey, now I can squeeze more margin out of my employees because I have a calculator. I don't have to sit there pen and paper. So when it comes to this conversation about cybersecurity versus managed IT, when I spun up my first MSSP in around 2015-ish, 2016-ish, the conversation for a small business really, it was trying to fractionalize that while the services may seem the same because the same thing is involved, they really are at a lateral position when it comes to who is going to be involved with that piece of technology. It's technology that shares the environments, not the departments that have to interact with it. And the exercise I would walk through them with is, Mr. Customer, do you guys have a front door? Yeah, we have a front door. Okay, who do you call when that door starts to rot, needs new paint, completely gets ripped off the wall on accident? Oh, a general contractor. Okay. Well, who do you call when someone's walking through that door that you don't want to have walk through that door? Do you call the general contractor? No. Well, what do you do? Well, I'd put cameras up. I'm gonna have it lock. I'm gonna have security man the door and make sure people don't walk through it. Right? It's this conceptual exercise of, just because the door is involved doesn't mean you call the same person to then manage said door. And the idea was that from a small business perspective, for so long, the technology was a calculator. It was something, it was a tool. It wasn't the actual door into my business. Now, going to your question a little bit on really what becomes the difference is if we go into where MSPs came from, which really was out of the value added resale world, right? We were VARs. We were selling projects of, hey, we were retail. Retail was difficult because all I can do is make the 10 points on top of the machine that I'm selling. Can I now sell the time to go ahead and install that computer? Well, okay, that's great. But now the computer's breaking and they're calling this guy down the street to fix it. So this consultative model came in of, can I just be that one-stop shop for all of these fractional services that I can manage under one roof? However, I will do it through someone else's services, not my own. It just happened to be that we bolted on help desk IT and managed IT because we said, hey, we can do it cheaper than outsourcing that. Now, into your question on how do you start managing this cybersecurity thing? Well, going back to the general contractor or the security guard, where we start to miss the buck, and I don't know if I'm straying way too far away from the question at this point, but where my head starts to go is, do I have the product development cycle, the time and the cash to invest in building out an entirely separate company to then resell to my customers? Or is this something of another service that I need to now manage? Because it is not a consultative model. It is not a service model. And like Reg said, 2/3 of cybersecurity has nothing to do with the technology. Well, right there in that statement alone means I can't just apply the services business model to cybersecurity, because if it's not trading time for money or economy of scale, then I might be at my limits of education as a business owner or entrepreneur to even build that product.
You need a skill set that you don't currently have. It's like
it's plain ignorance. You just don't know.
I think that's every time I talk with Wes or some other experts as well, it comes down to, do you have legitimate cybersecurity expertise? Like, are you selling a service that you offer, or are you just responding and saying, yes, Mr. or Mrs. Client, I'll get that done because you want me to? Those are two very different approaches to solving the problem of cybersecurity. One is out of expertise. The other is out of response and necessity.
Yeah, you know, I can take a, you're making me think about this. Let's see if this comes out correctly. I've never thought about this before. I remember in our Perch days, when we would talk to investors, one of the big problems they had with Perch was they said, hey, look, you guys have your own SOC that's on top of your product. So that makes you just an MSSP, right? And we would say back, well, no, you have to understand in this market, MSPs, when they approach something like a managed SIEM, they don't have the team to manage those alerts. Even if they have a set of 4, 5, 6 dedicated security guys, which puts them in the $50 million plus revenue range for an MSP, they don't have a full-time SOC, not the requirements that it takes, not for the automations, not for the full-time, everyone watching at 3 a.m. And so we realized when we came to market, it was required that we actually brought some of the people in process alongside it, because an MSP didn't have the ability to do those things. And then it made me realize there's nothing, like, I'm not hating, right? That's the nature of MSPs being SMBs themselves and growing into these roles. It's very rare to see an MSP that has the size and capability to build off a full-time SOC. And so then that just necessitates an honest, helpful conversation of what are you capable of doing? I find that a lot of MSPs end up selling cybersecurity more like a VAR. They don't realize it, but they are, right? Like, oh, you need EDR. Well, here's my choice for EDR. I plug it in and I will pretty much walk away, right? Oh, you need XYZ, right? Vulnerability scanning and management. Well, I'll plug this thing in and you'll get the reports that come in once a month and that's it, right? And they're not actually managing it. They're not building process around it. They haven't tied it into policy. They haven't adopted an information security program that goes with it. So what am I saying? I'm not saying that you shouldn't deliver services for the client that they need the most. I am saying you should understand how this wraps around and what your capabilities are around it, right? And if you don't have the capabilities of building process around this, if you don't have the people involved, then you might just be a little bit more like a VAR, and that's okay. You just need to be more strategic on who you work with, how you approach those conversations, because the worst thing you can do is drop off a product to a client, start billing them for it monthly, and then some incident hits the fan and it looks like it was improperly configured, or the incident came in and you didn't know what to do about it. You didn't have any partnership with anyone to help you through those processes. And that's where negligence comes in. That's where lawsuits come in. So I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just saying, have a realistic, honest conversation about what your MSP is capable of doing when it comes to cybersecurity delivery. Kyle, I see you shaking your head yes on that one.
Yeah, it gets into the world of about to say some shit that goes completely against the zeitgeist. And Wes, you and I have talked about this so many times, and I know we've talked about it with Reg, where you have to understand your capabilities and you need to be honest and transparent with yourselves, even though you may have a passion for technology. And this is what I love about the MSP world. We care so much about our customers that we sell them services that we don't have the ability to deliver. And I know that goes against what a lot of people will try to say of, oh, it's important. There's bad actors out there. We have plenty of attack surfaces, all of these things in there. And we care so much that we just want to say, yes, Mr. Customer, I will do all of this for you because I care about you. However, we sit there and then sell those endpoints and those doohickeys and those widgets. And the next thing you know, we're at risk for all this other stuff because we only know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And those unforeseen costs, either one is because our liability now, because we agreed to do that server, puts us at risk financially, and all of our employees' jobs are now on the line, which is what always concerns me. Or two, your customer is down the river without a paddle, and they're the ones that suffer.
And you're waving from the shore. Oh, hey, what are you doing all the way out there? Huh? Did you see the rapids ahead of you? Oh, you don't. Okay, well, I can't swim out there at this point. So
yep, exactly.
Couple of great points here in chat. One point that Reg made here that I'd really like to touch on is with IT, buying more technology gives you more result. It's like the point he made here, if you need more storage, you buy more storage. It's like a 1-to-1 correlation. But just because you sold more security doesn't mean you created any more security, right? A point that you made, Kyle, selling more security or selling these packages, if you don't have the actual expertise behind it to create a proper security program, doesn't create more security, just leads you to believe you have.
Well, I would even go further. If you don't have the cash to invest to build out that product or bring someone on that expertise to build out that product that knows, right? Like hire a Wes and say, hey, build out my SOC, right? oh, I can't do that. That's going to take too long. Okay, time isn't an excuse to get beyond your means, get beyond your skis.
Gone are the days of if we're going to get hacked, and now are the days of when. It's like a when not if mentality, and that's largely brought about by what Josh points out here too, is the defender's dilemma. Is bad guys have to be right once, and we have to be right all the time. And in a world where that's if that's the reality, is we're already all starting off the back foot.
But if you go back to my analogy, and this is why I use this one, I love it, or the general contractor or the security guy letting people in, there is a level to where you can have honest relationships with your customers as an MSP. And I don't know, Wes, if you agree or disagree, you can strategically tell them, hey, I need to bring somebody in to man the door I just installed. They're my boys. I've vetted them. They do really good work.
We have this happen often in the rest of the world around us, right? A general practitioner is not going to go work on your kidney, right? That kidney doc, whatever you call those, is not going to work on your brain. So yeah, making sure that you have a stable of others that you can bring in and knowing what you're capable of, I think that's the big takeaway here for sure. So Connor, saw a few questions come in chat. Any of that you want to particularly jump into?
Real quick on Jen's question, how many MSPs do you all work with that are SOC 2 Type 2 certified?
So for me, very few. I'm running into more and more of them. It's going to cost you somewhere between 25 and 40K to get a SOC 2 Type 2 done. You're going to have to start with the SOC 2 Type 1. You just do. So that means you have a readiness assessment to get into it. So I'm seeing more and more do it. And I can name MSPs that have one. I think it's fantastic to go through them. What does a SOC 2 Type 2 mean? Well, it just means that you have enough operational maturity in your organization to have to follow a rigorous assessment, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're more secure or less secure. I've seen some egregiously bad SOC 2s. I've seen some SOC 2s that are almost skirting the system because they have just such a small area that's in scope, and the stuff that matters is out of scope, right? So there's some wisdom you have to put into having a SOC 2, but I would never discourage an MSP from having a SOC 2. I think it's actually smart. I think it is a way to distinguish yourself, and it does push process maturity into your organization in ways that you might not have been prepared for. I've talked to a lot of like security startup vendors that are in the channel that are trying to go through the first SOC 2, and they're just shocked. I talked to one of them, and they're like, did you realize we have 63 tools that we have in use across like our 2 divisions, and we're only like 40 employees long? That's like 2 dedicated tools per person, right? It's going to be difficult to get through a SOC 2 with that, right? So I think they're valuable. I think you should go through them, but I think you also have to recognize, they're not infinitely valuable in what they provide to the table. But I am a big fan, and I'm in favor of them.
Well, that's where a prescriptionary process like the CIS controls come in. It's like SOC 2 Type 2 is an audit, but that's not necessarily what you should aim for. It's like the old saying, compliance doesn't create security. There's security and there's compliance. But they're definitely correlated in some capacity.
Well, and you used a word there, and I want to unpack that just a little bit, because if I'm going for SOC 2 Type 2, my MSSP did that, right? You have to have a target audience, target buyers that is going to attract, right? I was doing a lot of law firms, a lot of FINRA-based financial firms in my MSP, so the MSSP naturally needed to come behind and support that. If I didn't have those sectors, I don't know if I would have ever invested the $25,000 into SOC 2 Type 2. Because if I was just doing, like, I hate to say it, healthcare, HIPAA, none of them were asking for it. I knew I could build those processes because I was mature enough to lead that type of a team, but I would have never received an ROI on that $25,000 investment.
That makes a lot of sense. Is what's required is largely what prescribes what ends up getting done. Patrick's question here is largely about a better question to ascertain the skills and abilities of an MSP or to deliver security services. The example he gives here is, do they have the skills to deliver secure operations center? And this leads into our next topic, in that largely MSPs have to be like all great things in life, a little bit of introspection goes a long way. And that's kind of where you were trying to get to, or I imagine you were trying to get to, Kyle, and a lot of your coaching with MSPs is you got to be really honest with yourselves first before you could be honest with your clients. So assessing yourself as an MSP, should you provide cybersecurity, or how can you do that? Where should an MSP start?
So there's so many. This is one of those questions that's so fun because you could answer it in a few different ways. But if I got brought in and said, what am I going to look? Someone assessed me. Am I ready to start providing cybersecurity? the very first thing I'm going to look at is how are you providing managed IT? If you're going to build in-house the ability to say, I'm going to do managed cybersecurity, whatever that looks like. Is it SOC? Is it SIM? Is it EDR? Is it pen testing, true pen testing, where I'm doing, ethical hacking and I'm actually like, you guys get the gist. How are you at doing managed IT? What maturity do you have? Do you have gross margins in your organization that are at some best-in-class rate that is going to supplement our cash flow to build out a managed security practice without sinking the company? I see way too often MSPs, and without thinking about it, investing all this time to build out a cybersecurity practice, and the bottom line shows it. They're not making money. And I can tell you right now, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, not making money is going to make you think a little bit differently. You're not going to think strategically. You're going to think impulsively, because you're going to take the foot off the gas of growing your managed services division, because you're owner-led sales for a vast majority of the MSPs out there. And now all of a sudden, I'm going to deliver a bunch of services mediocrely. I'm not going to do anything well. So it's the honest introspection of, am I doing managed services well? That tells me I have the maturity to build out. And a lot of times this comes through revenue bands, like Wes was alluding to where that revenue band now will support the ability to bring in virtual CISO services, build out a SOC, bring in a true cybersecurity expert that might have CISSP to help build out a team to deliver all these tools and build out somewhere 24/7 monitoring. So it really comes down to a business level decision, not a technological decision in my book.
A statement that I don't know if it turned heads, but it definitely caused a lot of debate between Jason Slagle, which both of you know, and Ray Orsini, which both of you know as well, is when an MSP is deciding to keep or fire a client because they're not willing to spend they're not willing to create the necessary investment to create security. Ray was on one side, and it was, well, if 90% of security for small businesses is process and people, that comes at very little, if any, cost at all. You hand them a set of processes to follow, and you tell them to enable MFA, or it's very cheap to do that. It's not an actual security program, but it does create additional security. And Jason was on the other side, which was, just fire them right away. If they're not spending the money, get them out of here. It's a tricky place to navigate.
It is, because there's a bit of a left of boom and a right of boom to that, right? What I mean by that is, when we say left of boom, we mean before an incident happens. Right of boom means after an incident happens. And one of the things that's like really, actually have the book right here. One of the things that's really insightful about that whole idea comes from Cyber Defense Matrix. If you haven't read that book, you really need to get it, pick yourself up a copy. Because one of the things that Sunil talks about in that book is, as you shift right of boom, the costs go up, they skyrocket, because two things happen right of boom. One is response and recovery is very bereft of tools. There's not a lot of response recovery tools that are out there. Sure, your BCDR is a response and recovery tool, and that's largely about it. Everything else is people who and process. How do we recover? What's the stage in which we recover? How do we communicate this? Who's the law firm that's going to address this? How are we going to fight off that lawsuit? What about this lost business outage that's over here? Are we going to pay a ransom? All these things are very people and process driven that have nothing to do with technology. So that's the first big negative that comes when we go right of boom. The second is this: it becomes really difficult to predict and contain those costs. Right of boom, are you going to be 40 hours of billable lost time in? Or are you going to be 300 or 3,000 hours in? Sometimes it's difficult to know that until you know the true systemic nature and scale of the incident itself, right? And so I tend to side a lot more with Jason on that, because I think what's probably, I'm just reading into Jason's mind, he's probably thinking right of boom as much as he is left, right? If we could guarantee, if we could wave a wand and say that we stay left of boom, then I think Ray has a really good point there. But I think about it from the security practitioner's point of view, which is the realist, which is the what's this gonna look like when something happens. And if we're not prepared for that as an MSP when those things happen, that's where things really hit the fan, right? And that's where all of a sudden we get into some major trials and tribulation that may be difficult to recover from.
Well, and I don't think it's unreasonable, because I think there's a solution to every problem, to where, and I know we love this in IT, I think there is gray area between left and right when it comes to the entrepreneurial perspective of, I'm trying to grow a business. Because let's be honest, most small businesses in the United States are less than 9 employees. So when the costs hit a certain point, they're basically just going to throw their hands up and say, I don't want IT or cyber. And that's a problem as well. So I can look into raised buying, and I think this is a good dichotomy between Wes and I, because we kind of also split this to where I can't grow as an MSP if I don't have a product that hits a price point that my client profile or my target market can bear. So if I start dumping all these cybersecurity tools and I just fire clients because, oh, they're not a fit, then no one's going to be able to assist them. And that's going to be a massive problem, especially for the United States as a whole. If we want to talk right a boom, when all of a sudden the biggest majority of small business in the United States have no cybersecurity or IT because the MSP industry just said, screw them, we're going to be in a world of hurt. Our attack surface just really multiplied. So I think there's a way where we have to have our cake and eat it too. And I don't think you can just tell your clients to get lost.
Wes, a question after reading Reg's statement here about basically providing things that are more than just tools. You still need to deliver security technology, but also there's these security services. You mentioned this dichotomy that exists between left of boom and right of boom tools. It's like there's not a lot of tools to help you with right of boom. There's a ton that I'll air quote it here for everyone that's just listening. Tools that help you with left of boom. Is the ability for basically, does that dichotomy exist because there's not enough people that are helping with left of boom? Like there's not enough actual security services. There's just a deploy this tool and you'll be secure, and onboarding will help you get it configured right. And, you know, thumbs up, maybe my Mac will do it this time. Okay, it won't. I'll try some other time.
No lasers?
No lasers this time, I guess. Yeah.
I think I think, Connor, this is a problem that exists everywhere. Take building codes and fire and all this stuff. We do all this fire prevention stuff, but at the end of the day, when the fire happens, you got to roll a fire truck. You got to evacuate people. You got to know how to put that thing out. You got to know, what your routes are. You got to know all these things. Like, I think it's this way a lot. When you just sort of talk about when disaster strikes and something hits the fan, you just think it's just the way the universe has been built up. It's always, we're always going to be very bereft of tools, right? I think as we continue to modernize, hopefully we'll see some other areas, but it's a very people process heavy function. It just is. And I do think that then paints into the challenges that MSPs have because they don't normally have the staff to handle that. And what happens if, you have a more systemic event, like a Robert Chiaffi type of event when, he went through that big Kaseya compromise all those years ago. You just don't have people in the MSP to get to handle that, right? So now I think what you do is you have to have a wise shift into risk transfer, right? So now this becomes a risk. It should be a risk conversation from the beginning, but it becomes a bit of a risk transfer conversation into, what are some things I can do? The MSP 911 that Robert and CompTIA started up, also cyber insurance, because they're going to bring in a team. So I do think you have to think through what does that risk transference look like, but make sure that's all been clearly communicated with the client to help them understand, here are the things that we as your MSP are capable of doing. Here are the things that we're not capable of doing and you're not capable of doing. Here's the forces that we're going to bring in when we need to, when these things happen, right? But yeah, Connor, those are the conversations I think are very valuable and necessary to have with the client. I'll just say this quickly. I remember every time I talked to my board at my bank, I never left a board meeting without telling them, hey, remember, cybersecurity is still extremely high risk for us. It's in the world of IT, just overall cybersecurity risk is still the number one thing. And I remember one time, one of the board members asked me why I would always say that. And I said, because no matter how much money that we pour in as an investment to mitigate and how much I can show you growth and maturity, something can still happen. And when it does happen, all of a sudden the metrics change and we go into response mode. And I can't guarantee you the cost and I can't guarantee you the outcomes any more than I can go to a doctor and say, I want a CAT scan every year. And he can't guarantee me that I'm not going to have cancer, right? So let's just have that realist conversation and then say, because of that, we are investing in the time and resources and preparation to handle incident response. But even at my bank, I didn't have the capabilities. We had cyber insurance because I knew we're going to have to lean on that at some point to bring third parties in to help us deal with this because we just can't do it on our own.
When I was a property manager, I used to actually teach real estate agents how to manage property. And what most people forget, or at least they haven't thought of, is there's exactly 4 things you can do with risk. There's only 4. Transfer, remove, accept it, or reduce it. Transfer to cyber insurance. If you get hacked, you have a cyber insurance policy in place, you adhere to it properly, you've transferred the risk to the underwriter of that insurance policy. Remove, get rid of that client that won't invest in security, or if you get an audit, patch the things that existed. Accept is just give them the thumbs up. We know that's a risk, like you were just talking about. Hey, this is a risk. This is a when, not if mentality at this point. We just have to accept some risk at a certain level. And then reduce would be, maybe we should implement MFA across all of our accounts on all of our people to begin with. That's people and process. That's not really technology, although, MFA technology has come a long way since, the early 2000s. But yeah, it's something that a lot of people haven't thought about fully. Is there's only 4 things you can do with it. And whether or not, not choosing to do something, congrats, you've just chosen to accept. It's like the other 3 puts you in some amount of the driver's chair. So I have a thought here on the IR process. I sound like a real security nerd. I would never call myself a security expert, so I will take security nerd. On the IR process thing, a question I put in chat here that I'd love y'all's perspective on as well is, do you have an IR process in place and has it been tabletopped recently? And you can't ask one without the other. How many people would say, if I pulled a binder out of a cabinet somewhere and blew the dust off, it's like I could probably flip to the chapter that would be, yep, this is our incident response process. It's like, have you gone through that recently? It's like, I'm glad you brought up Rob Chiaffi, because what was that like going through? Everyone knows what's fire looks like and smoke smells like. Nobody really knows how to put out a fire. That's tabletopping your IR process. Is, yeah, I can smell fire right now. However, what does it look like to actually put it out?
Yep, I agree. I'll just say this. I did a large, maybe 200 MSP workshop about a month ago in Chicago. And, we got to incidents. We were covering FTC safeguards and requires you to have an incident response program in place. And so we got to that. And, I said, how many of you guys have a policy in place, and about half the hands went up. And I said, okay, the rest of you half, you either not in the know, and I understand that you're just not the person that knows, or you don't. I said, but you got to start somewhere. And I actually gave one of Tim Gold. So Tim Golden gave me permission to share one of his sample policies. And so I'm like, here's a QR code. Wouldn't you know it? Every phone went up to go get that policy. And Tim emailed me later and said, I got 120 leads or something out of that. I'm like, good. My point is, we can all be better, right? So even if we raise our hand and say, yep, I got one in place, we could probably be a lot better on it. We could probably use some more research. We could probably use a little more practice on it. We could probably go through it a few more times. Because that's probably just the reality, right? Just like I don't lift light weights once and I'm swole, right? It's going to take a lot of work to get there. So yeah.
I mean, you could be like Homer Simpson and think you are getting swole after that first workout, but
yes.
I mean, even in elementary schools, right? They do fire drills, right? It's the practice. There was a really good question by Patrick that I think we should spend a couple of minutes to unpack, which is there really a case for an MSP that doesn't offer security? Wes?
No, there shouldn't be, right? But I think this comes back to, you have to assess and understand what your capabilities are to do that, right? So for example, let's just play this out, Kyle. Because you and I did a webinar a long time ago on this. If I'm a sub $5 million, sub maybe $2 million, even $3 million MSP, there's a good chance the owner is still doing almost everything. They're still running their point on sales. They're still running a lot of like almost CTO-ish kind of roles and responsibilities. They don't have the time to be a full-time dedicated VCIO or VCISO for, a group of 5, 10, 15, 20 clients, right? So Kyle, I'll throw it back to you. In those cases for small revenue MSPs that are in high growth mode, that are really trying to kind of get out of that owner hustle mentality, what are the realistic capabilities for them when they don't have a VCIO? Can they offer cybersecurity services? Well, sure, they can offer like managed EDR and the other things that are required to get cybersecurity insurance, but they may not be managing risk for their client adequately. So what do we do in a situation like that? What are your thoughts?
Well, I start with the owner's brain. Do I have the cash to pay someone to do this? Or am I just going to totally lose my butt on it? And that's where we have 2 roads we go down. Am I high growth, where I plan on being a 10, 12, $15 million MSP, which means I need more products to sell my client? Then yes, I'm going to have to make some sacrifices. But if I'm not high growth, if I see myself growing 10, 11, 8% year over year, even if you're making decent net margins, let's say 10 to 12%, that's $500,000 a year, $250 after taxes. In a year, I only have some level of capital to build out and bring on someone to build off that offering, which is going to take me 3 to 6 years anyway with that type of cash. That's best in case scenario, right? I'm just throwing real world numbers. How much cash if I am 100% mature to build out this practice? Now, what you and I talked a lot about, Wes, is I want a baby step because a lot of that money is what the owners pay themselves with. So I'm not going to go down to net zero, right? My family's got to eat. I got to pay bills. So I have to have that perspective of who can be my downstream provider to cover what I can't do until I can do it, right? And that's where there are fantastic MSSPs out there that can supplement some of the areas that I don't know what I'm doing, nor can I afford to know what I'm doing. So I think, Patrick, I think it depends on if you're going to be an MSP where you're in that $2 to $4 million growth range, and you're like, I don't see myself getting beyond 5 in the next 3 to 5 years, you might need a strategic partner to look over that guy that needs to be the security guard of your engineers installing workstations. Because we are projecting sometimes on our clients that if they just want the door installed, they just want the door installed. Your business isn't to install that door. Now, if they want someone to make sure no one walks through that door, that's where you need a strategic partner. Now, if I go high growth, then maybe I'm going to spend more of that bottom line to building out a security practice because I want to have that security guard on staff to sell my customers. And I don't know if that's the right thing to say. I don't know if that's the gray area, but I can tell you right now, high growth MSPs, they sell what they do. They don't sell what they don't do.
They get really good at it because everyone knows if you promise an outcome to a client and you can't end up getting that, it just leads to a mess, not only for your own company, but for that client as well.
And there's some fantastic like Orbital Fire, right? Reg is on this call, right? Where they will really make it painless for your clients to interact with you as an MSP, and they're not going to make you look um, incompetent, right? This isn't incompetency, but I think sometimes we feel like it will be.
Yeah, I think there needs to be this transition in, the small business market in general, which is why doesn't an MSP offer accounting services? It's like, well, we're not accountants. It's like, of course we're not going to do that. It's like, should a similar transition exist for cybersecurity? Because there are MSPs who do offer accounting services in the same way there are MSPs that offer security services. And I think there's really two words we need to define here. It's let me make sure I don't butcher Patrick's question here. Is there a case for an MSP that doesn't offer security? Offer does not mean you have to do it. In the words of what Kyle's saying here, if you don't have the expertise, the worst thing in the world you could do is say you do it and then try to do it yourself. However, if you partnered with an Orbital Fire, an MSSP, whoever would, you're comfortable partnering with, because that'd be a really intimate relationship, you can offer security services. You're leaning on an expert to help you do that. In the same way you lean on a lot of your vendors that you currently work with to be experts there. You know how to deploy an RMM. Do you know how an RMM is coded and it works? No, but your vendor does, and you'll ask them those questions.
Well, and that's the beauty of the term managed services. I am merely just managing another service that I don't have to lift.
Yep. Last thing I'll say very quickly on this, because it goes into what Mark's comment was too, like it or not, you're doing this. Mark is right. And the perspective, remember the perspective of the client. You've been telling me for the past 10 years, Kyle, that you do all things IT for me. Well, IT is security. It's just protecting my IT. So therefore you do that. The knee jerk is that's been done is being done. And then when something happens, they point their finger at you and say, how could this not happen? So what does that mean? Well, that means a couple of things. One, you've got to have the conversation with your client from a risk perspective, what you're doing, what you're not doing, where they're at, what you're responsible for, and what they are responsible for. And then also you've got to make sure that your MSA is rock solid, that these things are very well defined and explained. That's not a topic for me to talk about. That's a qualified lawyer of cyber experience, a Brad Gross, Eric Tildes, that kind of person. But those are the two big things that go with it, because let's not kid ourselves. Clients they have a knee jerk that you're already doing all things IT for them and security by extension.
No, completely. Those letters of indemnification, those master service agreements are so important. But beyond all of that, what I find a lot of times in these conversations, and excuse me, everybody, for saying it this way, we have lost the balls to have serious conversations with our clients. We are afraid to tell them anything that is not, yes, I will do everything for you. And it's because of that fear that we end up getting ourselves into these pickles of, now I'm a cybersecurity provider because I never wanted to have the tough conversation with them to let them know that contract I sold them 4 years ago doesn't include these things like SOC SIM and all that stuff.
I think you're absolutely right. Having those hard conversations, but you already mentioned what's on the other side of that question, which is, am I going to feed my family, or are my employees going to put food on their families' tables? It's like,
and if you're an owner on that call, that is your primary responsibility, is the well-being of your company to pay your employees so that they can stay well-fed and grow in their careers.
and that's true. One of the other podcasts we did, I believe it was with Reg, was basically talking about that, is you don't know your client's business as well as they do, and they don't know how much they need security as well as you do. And that is most of the friction that exists. To talk on Josh's point here, though, if you're in charge of making an environment compliant and then auditing it, isn't that a conflict of interest? I will make one, of course, it's a conflict of interest, but I'll make one statement. If that goes wrong, that's where regulation and that's where the government steps in and starts to regulate the industry. You know, everyone's been talking about, is the MSP industry going to get regulated? If we're making environments that are compliant and then we're in charge of auditing the compliance of those environments, that is a recipe for somebody to do that incredibly poorly and necessitates that the government steps in and makes regulation occur.
I would prefer we go down the accounting route at some point, right? GAAP, generally acceptable accounting practices. You know, when you get too involved with regulation, then we're really not making any money as MSPs, because now I have to deliver more services that I didn't do before, that have higher costs, that now small businesses will ultimately suffer for.
Funny thing,
I
though.
don't know.
It's a funny thing, though, that, you know, when we see compliance, or cybersecurity insurance is another good example, forcing clients to do more, meaning the MSP is forced to give you more tools and more things that we know you need, your costs go up. You know, it just, I guess it proves to the MSP, like it or not, security is expensive, and doing it correctly is not cheap. And so if you're starting cheap, at least regulations, which only set the floor, never the ceiling, are forcing the minimums to go up, right? There's some advantage there for sure. I'm not a huge fan of like overarching, overbearing regulation. I've been in an industry, banking, which regulation post Dodd-Frank literally killed the banking industry. There's no new banks ever. Like, you can count on one hand the number of new banks per year. But regulation does set a very strong threshold and minimum. And maybe that's not so bad here and there for us.
So this question we're answering right here, should MSPs manage cybersecurity? It feels like a resounding yes. But where should MSPs start? Like, where should they start doing that? They have to do it. How should they go about starting that?
I see you thinking, Kyle. So I'll do my normal knee jerk. If you've heard me speak before, you know what I'm about to say. You got to start with yourself. Always, 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 always. So to eat your own tacos, you've got to say, what's the baseline standard? What does good look like? If you're making up what good looks like, you're missing the boat. I would say I've got a free podcast. It's thecybercast.com. Go check it out. It's by Phyllis Lee, the director of the CIS controls, myself and Ryan Weeks, hosted by Andrew Morgan. We go through every single control. We're now done with them, all 18. And we cover every control and we walk through them, how to build it, how to approach it, gotchas, things to think about, approach it from there, and start to build the resiliency and the capability in-house. If you haven't done it, you got to. And then from there, you will begin to understand how to expand it and how to offer it to your clients. But you cannot offer to clients that which you are not doing for yourself.
Eat your own tacos. Zibian Serrano.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I would 100% agree with you, Wes. I think, so again, if I'm the guy on the call that's thinking like the entrepreneur, the MSP business owner, and I have my own front door that I need a security guard on, right? I need to make sure that I don't have my own risk that then devalues my employees, which then eventually devalues my clients. So yes, I think you do need and this is a very thin line of, do cybersecurity for yourself, but don't then go sell it to your customers, because that scale is completely different. Now, how deep do you go? It's what you can afford. At the end of the day, you need to always be a little selfish in, do I have the capital to make sure my company stays healthy to then go to the next step?
And
it's going to take 3, 4, 5 years.
It does take a long time. I'm just
putting
putting here.
Businesses, they can go get a round of funding to build it all out, right? A services business doesn't have that level of cash flow because our multipliers aren't high enough, or we don't have enough equity to do that.
That makes a lot of sense. I would say to John's question, or Josh's statement here, if in the world of where you'd have to create security, or you have to offer it. If you can't do it, I'll just take an example from my personal life. The worst experiences I've ever had in being a part of Phin and running Phin is when I promised something to a client that we didn't end up getting done. Some of it because we couldn't do it, some of it because we decided not to focus on it. If you are at all in that camp and you're offering something that is not 120% in your wheelhouse, you can't answer the question, what are we the best in the world at? Why should anyone choose to work? You can't answer that with anything. You've basically, I don't want to say lied to your client, but you've at least lied to yourself in your understand and your ability to create results that your client now expects from you. And if they expect the results, and not only do you not create them, but you start to go in the other direction, you start to remove progress because you're not educated in the area of cybersecurity, or even if it's in somewhere in IT that you don't know how to create, you've just created a world of pain for yourself, not only for your client, but more importantly, let's get a little selfish here, for yourself as well. You've just created that pain.
I would say you're lying to your customers. And is that a good feeling to say, oh yeah, we can do that in the same way? You're building solutions while you're changing the tires while the car is moving, but it's also changing the tires in a direction to where you're going to go off a cliff when an incident does happen and you made a promise that you can't uphold.
It's like, I'll never forget that statement you made to me, Wes. It's like, well, this car is careening. We around a corner or off a cliff. We don't know just yet, but it is careening somewhere.
Yep. Yep. Sometimes we roll those dice just a whole lot more than we think we might, right? But I guess the encouragement here, I think we've all three done a pretty good job of not being the cyber doomsayers, right? Do you recognize that everyone can build this? To have resilience and maturity in cybersecurity does not take a high IQ. It takes attention to detail. It takes tenacity. It takes consistency. If you do those things, which literally any human can do, you can actually start to really come down this road correctly. And, going back to the beginning here, make sure you reach out to qualified partners. And like when we say partners, we mean like vendor partners. They're actually going to help you in this journey, but actually can provide for you and augment the things that you don't have on your own. Do that. Because I think if you start that direction, you'll find that you do have a growth pathway forward, and you can do it maturely, and you can bite off what you can chew instead of trying to do too much or rush too fast into things and just hope and pray to God that you don't get hit by something and it all comes crashing down, right? Don't do that. There's a better outcome and a better way to go to it. And I look at a lot of my MSP friends that have built very large, successful MSPs. That's how they've done it. I mean, they are aggressive, but they've done it wisely and smartly and carefully and had consistent growth that they've continued to build things and invested in their people to make sure that their people have the capabilities and quality to grow into the roles that they need. And that's exciting to me. And I think that's the path forward.
Absolutely. So we've talked for nearly an hour. We went everywhere from where cybersecurity, this transition MSPs are going to offer cybersecurity, to should they offer it, to how do you assess yourself and understand, to if someone wanted to continue this conversation with y'all or wanted to figure out a little bit more, where would you suggest they go to connect with you two?
I would just say for both of us, empathmsp.com. We'll pop that domain in here in a second. Check that out. What we're doing at Empath, we're helping MSPs grow in this journey. We recognize that most MSPs, maybe all MSPs don't have total consistency. They're not all rowing in the same direction. And so we're building a platform, an education capability, a community, all of these things together that help MSPs move together. And it's not the Wes and Kyle and Alex show either. We have a whole bunch of other people behind the scenes that are creating, producing, contributing, collaborating. And so we'd love for you to take a look at what we're doing and love to have a conversation about helping your MSP move in this direction. It's literally what we're passionate about and what we're committed to building and doing.
Awesome. That wrapped it up pretty nice, Kyle, but I'll give you the opportunity to say anything else. Is there any closing
Wes
remarks?
is way more eloquent than me. I would just say, go sign up for Empath MSP. Let's grow together and get shit done.
So I like you, Kyle.
One is eloquent, the other's direct. Both very valuable.
Yes.
Well, Wes, Kyle, it was a blast chatting with you. I always learn a lot speaking with both of you. And also I learn a lot about what I believe around all these subjects, just in talking them through and sometimes disagreeing on points, although it didn't sound like we disagreed, or maybe we're just so nice of people that we do disagree and we just get past it. I don't know. For those of you who are still with us, thank you so much for joining. There will be an e-guide, so we'll follow up to give you something to take home. It's how to integrate security solutions into your MSP stack. We talked about everything centered around, CIS controls, other frameworks. Somebody mentioned SOC 2 Type 2 audits, security partners like Orbital Fire, and other really well-known organizations that'll help you understand security a little bit better to help you protect your clients. That e-guide, also created by Wes, help by Wes, is here for y'all to help you put your best foot forward or to know where to start. That concludes our regularly scheduled programming. Wes, Kyle, do you have any last minute things to say to everyone who joined?
Thanks for having us. Super fun, my friend.
It's always fun.
A lot of fun. And shout out to Jamie again. Let's end it with more Jamie positivity.
More Jamie positivity. For those of you who don't know, Jamie is the person who runs all of this behind the show. He is, some of you may get this reference, he is our Simon Escobar. So he makes sure all this runs without a hitch, and he's definitely herding cats on a consistent basis. If I'm not the only cat, we now got 2 other cats here with me, just making sure we're all rowing in the same direction. Josh, thank you for the great questions, by the way. I do find that the most value people get out of webinars or just conversations in general is, hey, I have a specific question that, is relevant to me, my life, and my business. What do you guys think about it? So I always encourage that. Keep doing that with everyone else you end up chatting with as well. So this was the 4th webinar in our Deep Cyber Dive series. If you were a part of our other webinars, you'll get access to recordings, you'll get access to all those cyber guides, and we'll be reaching out shortly with everyone's contact information if you watched them. If you're on this one, we'll reach out with Wes and Kyle's contact information and that e-guide that was lovingly crafted with the help of the wonderful Wes Spencer, how to integrate security solutions into your MSP stack. Antonia, thanks for being here. Empath does rock.
She's from Australia, so a little further away for her.
A little further away.
Your check's in the mail, Antonia.
We have plants in the audience. Oh, no.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. It was great to see you.